often blamed, or if not explicitly, implicitly, right? Why do you smoke? Why do you not eat a balanced diet? Why don't you exercise? And the idea often in the background is that it's because you've made those choices, as opposed to the fact that your environment, your socioeconomic status, your access to healthcare or not, was not something that you had control over. So I can go on, and I have an example that I'm happy to give that I'd sort of like to sort of set up that might reappear in some of the other answers to the questions. But before I do so, and we're sort of a small intimate group, are there any questions or comments? Was everything that I said clear? Okay, so why don't I consider an example? And so let's imagine that there's a single parent, a single mom living in West Louisville, and let's say she makes a New Year's resolution, right? We're still in the time of New Year's resolutions, to eat a more balanced, healthy diet to improve her health, right? That's what she woke up on January 1st and said she wants to do. But so this is her desire. This is her intention that she sets for the year. But there are no grocery stores that sell fresh fruit and vegetables in her neighborhood or that's easily accessible by public transportation. The only food that's easily accessible to her is fast food or highly processed foods or like microwave dinner food. And even if there were a grocery store in her neighborhood, as we know, if you've been in a grocery store in the last 5 years, fresh fruit and vegetables are really expensive. You need to spend a lot of money in order to get a balanced meal. And so they're far more expensive than just going to McDonald's and getting a hamburger and like a whole meal. But even if she did have access to and could afford to pay for what it costs to make quinoa and prepare a salad and grill fish or whatever it is, she just doesn't have time to do that. She works 2 jobs, she's a single mom, she has kids, she has to drive them, et cetera, et cetera. So I've set up this example to show, and I'm engaging the social determinants of health here, that there are, in this example, there are neighborhood, geographic, there are economic, and there are time constraints that are preventing her from being able to actualize her desire, right? She wants to eat a well-balanced meal, and all of these factors that are out of her immediate control are preventing her from doing that. So where one lives, how much money one has, how much time one has to spend on making food and going to buy food is out of her control. And this person's situation, namely that they're not eating a well-balanced meal, is not because she doesn't want to, right? She has the desire. Rather, it's because of these structural factors, geographic, economic, and temporal, that are preventing her from being able to do that. So another way of saying this, and if there are public health majors in the room, you hear this all the time, there are upstream causes that are resulting in the downstream effects of her current situation, which is that she's not eating a healthy meal. And so I'll just take this one step further, and then we can move on, or if anybody has any follow-up questions. So let me move the example further. So this person in our example shows up in the emergency department, and she hasn't been to see a doctor in years, and she has complications from a combination of hypertension and diabetes. And so it's very easy for the healthcare professionals to judge her on multiple grounds. Patients are often judged as individuals, as I said, the products of so-called bad choices that they've made. But very often, healthcare professionals don't zoom out to see the structural and geographical and economic and temporal causes of the reasons why she might have ended up in the emergency department, namely that it wasn't a product of bad choices that she made. And so I think Harper's going to mention, and if you've taken classes with me, you've read, and if you're in a class with me right now, you will read the Louisville Metro Health Equity Reports. Are people who haven't taken classes with me familiar with those? Yeah, so there have been 2 in the last 9 years. There was one in 2017 and one in 2024. And I actually have a strong preference for the 2017 iteration. There's about 80 pages, and I'm going to reference these and reference some data from these in what follows, but there's about 80 pages of heat maps of our city along the lines of so many different metrics. So violence, diabetes, death from heart disease, the percentage of people who smoke, percentage of STIs, all sorts of things. And in every heat map, you see a sharp distinction. Louisville is still a very segregated city, as probably all of you who are showing up to a social determinants of health panel know. And it's just, if you haven't checked out these reports, just go have a look and peruse through them, because they are truly staggering. So why am I saying this? I'm saying this because in actually the 2024 Health Equity Report, which is a different kind of report, there's a really helpful passage that sort of summarizes everything I've just said. And they write, quote, that the choices people make are shaped by the choices people have. So, for example, I am 5'1.5". If I choose to become an NBA basketball player, that choice is just not an option for me, right? I can't make that choice because that's just not in my genetics. That's not in my realm of possibility. And similarly, for many people, I might have like a strong desire to be a women's basketball player, but that is never going to happen, and I'm fine with that. But the point is that so many of the choices that the desires that we have, especially if you're a member of a marginalized group and there are all of these hurdles that are preventing you from being able to actualize them, they're just not in your realm of possibility. And so I think that's that's sort of like a summary of what I've just said.
Of course, yeah. Does anyone have any questions before we get into the nitty-gritty kind of things? No? Okay, good. So our second question here was catered towards Dr. Smith, so I guess that we can just go ahead and skip that one and go right on to question number 3. So I know that you just mentioned a little bit of this, but I was wondering if we could dive a little bit deeper into how existing housing, transportation, and education systems and role shape health outcomes long before an individual ever enters a healthcare setting.
Yeah, so this is such a great question, and here I'm going to sort of dive more deeply into the health equity reports. And again, these are such valuable troves of information about our city. So if you're interested in this topic, like there's no better source. If you email me, I can give you the links. They're free. They're on the Louisville Metro website. So it's really important to notice how these environmental, social, and structural factors are all connected. And again, I think it's helpful to sort of contextualize this. When you show up in the emergency room, it's like you and your body, it's your body, and you are out of context. And often that is really dangerous because people, healthcare professionals, they're trained to treat bodies. They're not often trained to treat bodies who are the products of neighborhoods and histories and segregated cities and lack of resources. But I think that that's wrong. And that's why, I teach a lot of pre-med students and pre-nursing students, and I think that this is absolutely imperative, especially if you're going into those fields, because oftentimes in many medical schools, this isn't the approach that's taken. So let's go back to the example above. And so we have, remember I said, this single mom who has hypertension and diabetes, and she hasn't been to the doctor in 5 to 7 years. And so she lives in West Louisville. I'm going to draw on some of the data from the 2017 Health Equity Report. So rates of diabetes are up to 4 times higher in the residents in West Louisville than in East Louisville. And that's on pages 136 and 137 of the report. With regards to deaths from heart disease, the rates of death on the west side of town are 2.5 times the rates of those on the east side of town. And so we could look at this and we could look at the demographics and see that the west side of town is much poorer and much less white than the east side of town. And we could, if we didn't know anything about this topic, conclude that either Black people are genetically more prone to hypertension and diabetes, which is something that many people believe. It is not true. Or that there's something that genetically predisposes them, or that they've just made a lot of bad choices, and that's why they're ending up in these kinds of with these kinds of health conditions. But that is not true. That is just false. That is genetically, physiologically, historically false. What we do know, and what is true, is that food systems and food insecurity, stable housing, adverse childhood experiences, the ability to go to school not hungry and not tired, the ability to exercise, the ability to have access to outside green spaces that are safe, the ability to sleep, the ability to exist in a state of low stress. All of these things, when you do not have access to them, contribute to diabetes and heart health, and lack of heart health. And it's also worth noting, and this is in our city, a hospital on the west side of town opened in 2024. There had not been a hospital there in over 100 years. And so what does that mean? That means that even if people are experiencing adverse health outcomes and want to go to the hospital, if they don't have a car, or if public transportation is, off schedule, or if any one of these, contingent factors that makes it difficult for them to get to hospitals, many of which were intentionally put in the suburbs, in the rich white suburbs, so a whole side of our city did not have healthcare that was easily accessible. And so again, many health conditions that could have been prevented can often cascade and become major health conditions that are not easily cured or treated. So this is in the absence of continuous care. Just very quickly, and then I'll conclude this question. So other factors, and there's a lot of information, especially in the 2017 Health Equity Report, that